I'm Sophie and this is Florence. Today we will be presenting about anxiety in the classroom. Before we begin, we'd like to pay our respects to the First Nations people observing our presentation today and acknowledge their ongoing commitment to protecting the land on which we live and learn.
Before we touch on anxiety, we want to introduce you to the fight, flight, or freeze response. The fight, flight, or freeze response is your body's natural reaction to danger. It's an instinctive response that helps you react to perceived threats. The response instantly causes hormonal and physiological changes which allow you to act quickly so you can protect yourself. However, whether you fight, fly, or freeze is not up to you. It's an unconscious, automatic process that our ancient ancestors developed many years ago. In fight and flight responses, the body releases adrenaline, which has a range of effects. Your heart rate might increase, getting more oxygen to your major muscle groups, your breathing rate might increase, and your thoughts become faster and more chaotic as you try to process the environmental data. Then we have the freeze response, which is often seen as a lack of behavior. However, holding still in the presence of a threat is quite an adaptive behavior. The fight, flight, or freeze response is a fantastic thing, but only if the fearful thought that triggers it is based on a real danger, and only if this reaction calms down after the danger has passed. If we frequently view situations or things as more dangerous than they actually are, we will keep experiencing fight, flight, or freeze false alarms. As a result, our bodies can get stuck in these states, initiating responses that aren't necessarily useful. Because our bodies weren't designed to go through frequent fight, flight, or freeze false alarms, this state of anxiety brings a range of negative symptoms with it. So then, what is anxiety? So as we've just seen, anxiety is your body's natural response to stress. It's normal to feel some level of fear or apprehension about what's to come at some stage in your life. Most people might feel stressed about their first day of school, sitting an exam, or giving a speech. However, anxiety is an amplified sensation of worry or apprehension that interferes with one's ability to function and focus in their everyday life. Feelings of anxiety can make us feel on edge, excessively stressed, cause us to avoid situations, and can affect our attention span.
Anxiety can often result in negative or challenging behaviours if it is not handled appropriately. For children with anxiety, there are usually events, behaviours, objects, or environments that can trigger a negative response in a child. This is known as the antecedent. In some cases, a teacher or their response to a situation may actually be the antecedent. It is important you are aware of your own emotions and behaviours in difficult situations to help prevent this escalation. The behaviour refers to the child's negative response. This may manifest as a meltdown, yelling, crying, or even silence. Every child's behaviour will be different. The consequence is what happens in response to the behaviour. If a child reacts poorly, they may receive a punishment at school, such as detention. In other cases, their peers may react to their behaviour through teasing or ostracising them. Another consequence could be the child feeling unsafe in the school environment as their anxieties are not managed effectively. A good way to understand anxiety and challenging behaviours is through a traffic light system. Generally, children don't just suddenly have a meltdown spontaneously. There are usually a sequence of events that can trigger a child and can lead to a gradual escalation of the situation. If we address these triggering events, objects, or behaviours effectively and appropriately, then we can reduce the likelihood of a child reaching a full meltdown. In terms of the traffic light system, the green zone refers to when a child is comfortable and feels safe. This is optimal at school as the child will be able to focus better in class and engage in learning more efficiently. The orange zone refers to when there are things in the environment that are causing the student stress. These could be a number of things such as a teacher's tone, a specific activity, or other students' behaviour. This is a pivotal period where we need to act quickly and appropriately to reduce the stresses the child is experiencing. The red zone is when a child becomes so overwhelmed that they can't control their behaviours or emotions. They may be having a meltdown or experiencing profound stress and frustration, which in turn makes it difficult for the situation to be controlled. The best way to figure out what triggers a child is to have a chat with them. Every child is different. We can't know how to help them unless we have an open conversation about what they find stressful or uncomfortable. In some cases, a child may not be able to articulate their problems. In these instances, talk to their family or other professionals involved in their life. Also, observe them in the classroom and playground, as that way you can see how they react in a more natural context with other kids. Sometimes we can't stop the escalation from happening. We need to stop and let the situation play out before we can intervene and support the child accordingly.
The terms anxiety and fear are often used interchangeably. However, these terms do not mean the same thing. They are both physiological and emotional responses made by our bodies, but they are in response to different things. Fear is a response to a readily identifiable external threat or danger. The danger is present and can be recognized by people around them. However, anxiety is a response to thoughts about possible consequences that could occur from a threat. For example, if I'm experiencing fear, I might be scared of a barking dog or a person threatening me. But I might be anxious about wondering if that dog will ever get out of its yard and if a person might ever threaten me. It is these thoughts that set off the fight, flight, or freeze responses. Since fear is a response to a visible or immediate threat, it's relatively easy to know when not to be afraid. However, anxiety is a response to a pattern of thought. It's much harder to stop a thought than it is to change something present in your immediate environment. So now that you have a more clear idea of what anxiety is in the general population, we will go into some more tailored information that will support you in recognizing and managing it in your school-age children. Apprehension and distress is expected in children and normal at specific times in development. For example, from birth to the preschool years, healthy children might show intense distress at times of separation from their parents or other people who they're close to. Young children might have short-lived fears, such as fear of the dark, storms, animals, or a fear of strangers. However, when responses to these antecedents start to cause trouble sleeping, headaches, stomach aches, or an inability to attend, it could be due to anxiety. As a teacher, it's important to identify anxiety in the classroom so you can refer students on to further support. Students with anxiety might have physiological signs that are transient. They appear in the face of an anxiety-inducing situation, and you can leave immediately. For example, in a student who routinely asks to go to sick bay or needs to toilet just before their turn to present. These symptoms might alleviate as soon as they go home, or you let them skip their presentation today. Cognitively, they might be pessimistic as their anxiety invites them to think about the worst thing that can happen. They might seem distracted or preoccupied when asking them to do a task, or they might even be a perfectionist. These perfectionistic students might always seem to catch the one detail in a situation that could cause them anxiety. You might have a student that has such a high standard for what's acceptable when it comes to their work that they might destroy their own work at even the slightest mistake because it doesn't measure up to their own internal standards. Or they might become so fussed on the way it needs to be done that they never actually start doing it. Anxiety can also be seen in students' behavior. With the fight, flight, or freeze response, some students might show signs of freezing. They can be shy, withdrawn, and avoid or procrastinate certain tasks because of that fear of failure.
If you suspect a child might be anxious or struggling, the first thing to do is ask them if they are okay. It's important to create a safe space where you can have an open conversation with the student. Dialogue is key. This is all about two-way communication. Supports to implement include to support the children in a more challenging situations. It's crucial we don't encourage avoidant behaviours. Rather, we need to create an avenue where the student is gradually encouraged to confront these difficult situations in a gentle and supportive way. Anxiety-filled situations can feel daunting and stressful. To overcome these feelings, break down large tasks into smaller steps. This can make them feel more manageable and achievable for the student. It also means that they can gradually work towards a goal rather than facing the situation head-on too quickly. Rewards and motivators can be incorporated into the classroom environment when an anxious child is facing a tough situation. Often, a child may catastrophize and focus on the worst case scenario. A teacher or support worker can ask the child simple, directed questions to help change the child's mindset. This notion is all about rethinking the negative situations and replacing it with a more positive outlook. Questions such as, what's the most likely result, are incredibly useful tools that can really help shift one's mindset. Create a safe space. Recognize the time when a child is becoming anxious. Make yourself aware of the triggers and possible strategies to support them. By removing or reducing the necessary triggers, it can create an environment where the child feels more safe and thus is more inclined to participate in class. If you think a child needs more help than you can give, tell someone. This may mean seeking professional help or telling a colleague. It's vital that we recognize our own skills and boundaries and acknowledge that it's okay to ask for help. Consider avoiding these things. Ignore the child's anxious behaviors. A child's school years are critical formative years. If anxiety presents during this time, it can increase and worsen if proper strategies are not implemented. In recognizing the problem early, we can implement solutions earlier too. Children don't just grow out of anxious behaviors. In having this mindset, you are demeaning what a child is going through and are thus not providing them with the support system they desperately need. Teachers have a lot on their plate and are not expected to fill in the role of psychologists or social workers. You should feel comfortable referring these students on to further support rather than overloading yourself with cases you are not adequately trained for.
In the classroom, it's important that we respond to a child rather than react to them. By this, we mean have an open and honest discussion with the student about why they are behaving a certain way. When a student behaves negatively, avoid reprimanding them immediately. That can often trigger a child and lead to an escalation of challenging behaviors. This is also about managing your own emotions. If a child is behaving badly or having a meltdown, take a breath before responding. If you let your frustrations overpower you, then the situation will likely continue to escalate and could get out of hand. Be responsive to the child, not reactive.
A jar full of feelings is an idea adapted from Roald Dahl's book, The BFG. We speak more about it in our literacy and social communication video linked below. Essentially, the student is given many different colours of glitter, which they can assign to feelings of their choice. For example, happy, fearful, lonely. As they feel each emotion, they can pour it into a jar of water and shake it around. The feeling which they are feeling most typically ends up as the dominant colour in this jar. This is a practical way to support a student to recognise and express their feelings. It also supports them to regulate their feelings as they can watch the swirling contents in the jar slowly settle to the bottom in a calm fashion. Currently, the New South Wales Government works alongside mental health organisations to both better support children in the classroom and to equip teachers to recognise and respond to anxiety symptoms effectively and promptly. These programs are established across K-12 with specific programs introduced in both primary and high school. These initiatives have been developed by a range of organisations and to work across different contexts within the New South Wales education system. BU by Beyond Blue and Got It are examples of programs that are currently in place in the New South Wales education system, and we'll examine this further in the next few slides. Other New South Wales Government education mental health initiatives is Safe Minds by Headspace. BU is a national mental health initiative run by Beyond Blue alongside Early Childhood Australia and Headspace in New South Wales schools. The primary purpose of this program is to provide teachers, clinicians and early childhood educators with the skills necessary to promote positive emotional and mental health well-being in the classroom. This initiative provides free, professional, accredited and evidence-based training. It is based on a whole learning community approach, meaning that this program stems well beyond the confines of the classroom. It's centered on providing early support and working alongside the student's family and other individuals in the community to help understand and empower the child to overcome their anxieties. Got It stands for Getting on Track in Time. It was collaboratively created with New South Wales Department of Education and New South Wales Health. This initiative was designed as a system that works closely with students and their families in both their school and home environments. The program strives to reduce the severity and frequency of challenging behavioural difficulties, both in the classroom and at home. To achieve this, families and schools are provided with strategies and tools to create an adequate system that allows them to respond to and conduct problems quickly, appropriately, and fairly. It's all about ensuring that all the central people in a student's life, including their teachers and other school staff, have an understanding of the child's behavioural difficulties and building up capabilities to help reduce triggers and respond to negative actions.
Cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, is a behaviour modification intervention which might be used to support a student through anxiety. CBT should be administered by a trained professional to ensure no harm is done. You should involve the school counsellor in this process, but it is beneficial to have a brief understanding of it so you can provide further support. CBT aims to help individuals notice and comprehend their own thoughts and develop new ways of thinking about these thoughts. It supports them to modify how they would usually cope with or respond to anxiety-provoking situations, and then modify their behavioural response to it. Treatment emphasises cognitive restructuring to decrease the troublesome thoughts that stimulate that fight, flight, or freeze anxiety response.
If you find yourself interested in finding out more about anxiety, reading this book called Starving the Anxiety Gremlin can help you develop strategies to help your student through this time. This book is a CBT workbook where it goes through what anxiety is and how to manage it. It uses the principle of CBT to help the reader modify their perceptions of these perceived fears and threats.
Now, I want to explain some practical ways you can support a student using CBT. First, it's important to note many clients with anxiety know little about the condition in the first place. They might know they're afraid of different things, and different things make their heart rate go faster or palms a bit sweaty, but they don't realize that they are not alone and that there is a term for this. Educating the student or students you're working with is always a strong starting point. Education about anxiety can help a client to understand why they have anxiety, how it is hurting them, and how a certain amount of anxiety can be beneficial, but when these false alarms continue, it's not. Second, a crucial principle of CBT is restructuring thoughts and challenging negative thoughts. But again, before a student can challenge their thoughts effectively, they should understand the relationship between thoughts and their feelings and behaviours. Relaxation in the face of triggering situations can support the student to tackle that fight or flight response. Social skills. Systematic desensitization or exposure therapy can help students face their fears, which is often linked to social situations. Creating a fear hierarchy with your student can be useful, where you would address each fear in order from least to most anxiety-inducing. However, the point is not to create fear. Your student should not be placed in these situations until they're equipped with the relaxation, distraction, and skills rehearsal techniques to limit their anxiety response.
There are a wide range of tools and resources available to teachers to use currently in the education system. As mentioned previously, the New South Wales Government has established a range of mental health programs focused on training teachers, support workers, and early childhood educators to support children with mental health problems, including anxiety. Other resources, including regulation scales, parent-teacher-child questionnaires, are available and can be tailored to a child's specific needs and difficulties. For example, regulation scales can be filled out by a teacher or support worker and a student to help establish how the child feels in certain contexts, things that may trigger them, and situations or tools that make them feel better. Examples of these templates can be accessed at the South Australian Education Government link on the slides. These templates can be accessed from a range of other sources too. Whilst these tools are useful and often readily available, it's important that they are utilised appropriately and effectively. Often, teachers and support workers will likely not have the time to properly integrate these resources into their classroom due to already excessive demands. We would like to acknowledge that hypothetically, these tools allow teachers to map out a student's need in a longer-term context. In reality, these tools may not even be able to be used at all.
This is a little infographic from an Australian organisation, the Kids Helpline, that we want to leave you with. It reinforces some of the key points we've spoken about today, such as how to further educate yourself about anxiety and recognize and manage it in your students.